Well, thanks very much, Fu. It's a real pleasure to be here this morning, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning to you all and to our friends from the media who are here today. I'm just going to talk very briefly about the general situation in aviation at the moment, and hopefully that will lead in nicely to our panel session after about 10 or 15 minutes. Airlines, as you all know, are the lifeblood of the global economy, and this year 3.8 billion passengers and 53 million tons of air cargo are expected to be transported by air. In doing so, airlines will support some $2.4 trillion in economic activity and some 58 million jobs globally. And in Asia Pacific, the corresponding numbers are $700 billion in GDP and 33 million jobs. And by 2034, global demand will reach 7 billion passengers, of which almost 3 billion will be in Asia Pacific. And if we can realize this growth potential, we can easily see aviation in Asia Pacific supporting over 70 million jobs and $1.3 trillion in economic activity in the next 2 decades. But that's very much dependent on the industry having sufficient infrastructure to support this growth. And this is only possible through a partnership approach involving all the aviation stakeholders, including governments. To set the scene for this morning's discussion, I'd like to focus on 3 broad areas, which are financial performance, safety and sustainability, and the rise of what we call the LCCs. It's no secret that airlines have always struggled to turn a healthy or sustainable profit for their investors. And with hard work and the confluence of some critical factors, we expect that airlines will deliver a $36 billion profit in 2016 for a 5% margin. Even more significantly, airlines are starting to provide a return to their investors, without whose support we cannot meet the forecast demand for air travel. And the average cost of capital is estimated around 7% this year, and for only the second year in a row, and the second time in our history, airlines collectively are set to deliver a return in excess of that, 8.6%. So what's happened? Certainly, lower oil prices have helped, but that impact has been delayed and diluted in many parts of the world due to forward hedges at higher than market levels, as well as the rise of the US dollar against many local currencies, particularly, of course, in Asia Pacific. Efficiency gains across the board are also making a significant and sustainable difference. Airlines now regularly fill over 80% of their seats, and newer generation aircraft are 15 to 20% more fuel efficient. Consolidation, joint ventures, and alliances are also giving consumers more choice and helping airlines to be more efficient. And finally, demand for our product remains very strong. Last year, we saw the strongest traffic growth globally in 5 years, and the ever-falling price of air travel is helping more and more people to take to the air. But I need to put some perspective on that profitability. Firstly, on a per-passenger basis, airlines are making less than $10 for each passenger carried. So airline profits are still very fragile in the face of any new taxes that our partners in government might be planning, or in the face of any higher prices planned by infrastructure partners like airports and ANSPs. And furthermore, and most importantly, this profitability is not evenly distributed. If we just go to the next slide. This one. The majority of the industry's profits are being generated in North America, $19 billion. On a per-passenger basis, they will retain $21 per passenger. Asia Pacific Airlines are expected to generate a $6 billion profit, which equates to only $5 per passenger. And let me provide you with some even more dramatic numbers. Preliminary results for 2015 show average EBIT margins for the Southeast Asian carriers at just 0.3%. And that's the lowest amongst all regions except Africa, where losses were being generated. And by comparison, Middle East average is 10%, Europe 5%, North America 13%, North Asia 9%, Southwest Pacific 7%. Why is this region, with so much potential, lagging in profitability? It is, after all, home to many well-managed airlines that enjoy excellent reputations for good customer service. And I'd like to suggest some of the reasons for this lag in profitability. Firstly, as we all know, fuel prices have fallen over the last 18 months. But at the same time, the US dollar has risen by 20% against most of our local currencies. And as carriers in this region purchase fuel in dollars, this has significantly limited the positive impact of the fall in fuel prices. Secondly, Asia-Pacific accounts for some 40% of global air cargo, and the cargo business has never been so tough. Globally, air cargo revenues peaked at $67 billion a few years ago, and this year we anticipate revenues of only $50 billion. Capacity growth has also put a huge pressure on yields. These are severe challenges to improve the value proposition, even though we have improved technology and processes. And thirdly, of course, this region is home to ever-intensifying competition. At the regional level, low-cost competition, which basically means a lot of new entrants, has a 54% market share, the highest in the world. In parallel, the superconnectors of the Gulf have increased competition on what was a traditional market for Southeast Asian carriers, the kangaroo routes from Europe down to Asia and down to Australia. Now, of course, competition is always a good thing, and consumers are getting a great deal, and it will get even better as airlines respond to changing consumer demands with innovation. But preserving a healthy air transport sector in Southeast Asia and the economic and social benefits that it delivers is much wider than an airline challenge. Governments and infrastructure providers will also need to contribute with efforts to keep costs low and efficiency high. Let me just get my next slide here. Safety, of course, remains our highest priority. Last week, we announced the industry safety performance for 2015. And if we look at jet aircraft in 2015, we had one major accident for every 3.1 million flights. That's a 30% improvement on the 5-year average of one accident for every 2 million flights. And yet, the last 2 years have also seen events that can only be described as unthinkable, including the disappearance of an aircraft, MH370, the downing of an aircraft by a missile, MH17, the deliberate destruction of an aircraft by a suicidal pilot, Germanwings, and of course, we must add to that the loss of an aircraft in what is suspected of being an act of terrorism in Egypt, Metrojet. There are no simple solutions to the issues raised by these terrible tragedies, but we must honor those who lost their lives and their friends and their loved ones by rededicating ourselves to making flying even safer. Working with our partners in government and industry, we will drive improvements based on global standards and best practices. And industry adoption of global best practices through initiatives such as the IATA Operational Safety Audit, or IOSA, is also significantly raising the bar. And to assist smaller and entry-level carriers to adopt these best practices, we launched the ISSA, or IATA Safety Standard Audit, last year. And a number of new entrant FSCs and LCCs have already successfully registered in this ISSA program and are well on their way to making the upgrade to IOSA. Environmental sustainability is our license to grow, and the aviation industry has adopted a 4-pillar strategy based on technology, operations, infrastructure, and market-based measures to address its CO2 carbon emissions. and it has adopted ambitious carbon reduction targets. A 1.5% annual average improvement in fuel efficiency to 2020, capping net carbon emissions with carbon neutral growth from 2020, and cutting net carbon emissions in half by 2050 as compared to 2005. And we're seeing considerable success through our partnership approach. Fuel efficiency is improving around 2% every year. And sustainable fuels for aviation have matured with the knowledge that they are safe and effective. And earlier this month, a CO2 standard was agreed that will institutionalize the continuous technical improvements that come with every new generation of aircraft and engines. And now we need governments to step up at the International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO, assembly this autumn, it's in September, to agree a global mandatory carbon offset scheme to be in place in time for 2020. Our membership is doing all it can to provide support to this bold initiative, what are called market-based measures, or MBMs. I'd like to talk about LCCs. Historically, as you all know, LCCs started in the USA with carriers such as Southwest, but the US LCC capacity only stands at around 30% today, and the US market is still dominated by the hubbed network carriers. LCCs moved across to Europe. The single European skies opened up the markets to the likes of Ryanair, which I think is now the world's largest carrier, EasyJet. LCC capacity in Europe now stands at something like 45% of the market. And ASEAN has seen an explosion in LCCs and hybrids, with the penetration by capacity the highest in the world at 54%. In the last 5 years, LCC penetration in ASEAN has risen from 40% up to that figure of 54%. And the growth is even more dramatic if we look at some of the individual country markets. The Philippines, 52% to 80%. India, 40% to 67%. Indonesia, 38% to 57%. Something really major is going on in Asia Pacific. What's happening with the single ASEAN market? Will that see further growth in LCC capacity in the region? And what's happening with the second-tier Chinese carriers, some of whose LCCs are now starting to spread their wings into the sub-region in a big way? Will that see further LCC growth in China and in markets to and from China? Well, these questions bring us on very nicely to our panel discussion, ladies and gentlemen. And at this stage, I'd like to invite our distinguished panelists to join me here on the stage. So I'd like to first introduce them to you. We have James Jim Rhee, who's the Chief Executive Officer for North Asia of AirAsia. We have Albert Burhan, who's the President and Chief Executive Officer of CityLink Indonesia. Campbell Wilson, the Chief Executive Officer of Scoot, and Stephen Wong, who is the President of Spring Airlines. And could you join me, ladies and gentlemen, in giving them a big round of applause as they join me here on the stage.